I've got one question, and I apologize for not asking it before, and you and I have swapped a couple texts about it. What is the delay with the county putting our impact fee ordinance up for a vote?
I don't know that it's necessarily a delay, other than they wanted some opportunity to look at it. Mr. Fisher asked for me to engage in individual conversations with the county commissioners to give them an update of where we are and answer any questions that we have. So I've been working through that process, and my understanding is that they have agreed that they will put it on one of their March agendas. I do not have a firm date, however.
Okay. Please, yeah, press that. I mean, that's something it's been going on a long time. We need
Have a
money.
conversation with you about that.
Yeah, we need that money. Okay.
I talked to Don this morning.
I understand. Mr. Kruppenbacher also has been engaging with Mr. Fisher on that process.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we wanted to start by talking about what's changed since the board approved budget for this year back in September. And primarily, we have the third calc incorporated into our numbers now to present to you today, along with all the FTE growth we've seen. So we wanted to start there, then we'll talk a little bit about the current status of the state budget, what we've seen so far coming out of session, and then some other things going forward into next year that we've already begun to plan for, as well as getting your input. So first of all, we have the FTE growth. You can see here what was included in the second calculation was our projection for this year, which actually gets made before the year even starts. So that incorporated the growth that we were expecting. And then, of course, all the hurricanes happened, which were totally unexpected. And as we all know, we saw some significant growth, primarily with students and their families coming from Puerto Rico as a result of Hurricane Maria. So you can see the FTE growth that we have here, somewhat split between our traditional schools and our charter schools. So some of those students did go to our charter schools. Mr. Thacker, did you have a question?
Yeah, on the different calculations that they do you know when does class size count for meeting it? Is it one time throughout the year?
October.
Only October.
The October survey.
There's not a true-up? There's not a February true-up?
There is not. They look at it in February, but there's no funding implications in February.
No penalties?
No.
I will tell you, as I shared with the board in either last week's update or the week before, we are not going to be in full compliance with class size for Survey 3, which is this week.
Doesn't sound like it matters.
Okay? Just simply because of the level of growth that we've experienced, and I don't want to do things that are not instructionally sound for kids at this stage of the year. So our teachers have absorbed more students in their classes. We are making sure that it's not excessive, and also providing additional support with paraprofessionals and those types of things when we can. Keep in mind that the third calculation is from October 13th. That was the drop dead day, I believe, during the Survey 3 period, and then FTE for this survey is this week. And as you can see also, whilst our charter schools absorbed some of the students from the island of Puerto Rico as a result of Hurricane Maria, most of them came into our public schools. The charter growth is primarily attributed to Florida Cyber Charter Academy.
So we're not getting any help from anybody for those students that we got from Puerto Rico. That's not a knock on what we're doing, but the state's not going to.
We'll get the additional funding that comes from the February survey at the end of the year, but that's it.
Yeah, ask Deborah, you should get an explanation.
Dr. Pace, so you mentioned this Florida Cyber Charter Academy.
Yes, sir.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Florida Cyber Charter Academy is the school that uses the K-12 virtual curriculum. One of the interesting things is that with House Bill 7069, which now opens up choice across district boundaries, the majority of students attending Florida Cyber Charter Academy do not live in Osceola County. They are from counties all over the state. In fact, there are about, if I'm not mistaken, I can get you the exact numbers, about 200 Osceola County residents who are attending school with Florida Cyber Academy. The rest of them are from all over the state. And their growth went from about a little less than 400 students last year to over 900 currently.
I see.
But so if you, I'm going to make sure I understand, the 1147 that grew in charter, 830 were for charter school, for the,
Florida Cyber.
so that leaves 307, right?
Correct.
Am I doing that? 317?
Correct.
And if I divide that by the 1341, that's 22%. Did I do that right? Which is higher than the charter, so they're holding their own percentage-wise. Is that right? What did I do wrong?
You would take the 830 from the 12,894 to get the percentage.
No, I'm just looking at the growth, the changes. Their change, as a percentage of the total change,
They're holding their own in terms of enrollment. As in
you-
terms of growth this year, the district absorbed about 55%, if I'm not mistaken, of the new students coming in, and charters were about 45%, correct?
Right, because the total change is 1892 at the bottom there.
But if you don't count
That-
but
the,
you take the 830 out of that.
right, but if you take the 830 out,
Oh,
then charters really didn't, I mean, that 45% includes 830 for the Cyber Academy.
Yes.
Correct.
You grew at 4 times the rate that they grew without the charter, the virtual charter in there.
Correct.
Which is about 4 or 5 to 1 is about the same. We percentage-wise, if we have 20% of our kids going to charters or 17%, about that same number of the increase that went. So
Growing.
it held about the same.
Correct.
Okay. I was
But in
thinking,
the last 2 years, remember, the charters had been absorbing almost all of the growth. Last year, the district only grew about, what, 1%, 2%?
okay.
And charters absorbed all the rest of our growth.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm with you.
And obviously, as we have more charter schools opening each year, that takes a larger percentage.
Are charters asking for a longer term so they can secure long-term financing?
Some, for example, the Orlando Science Charter, you just approved a longer term.
Okay, so our next slide, we have the numbers for the actual hurricane-affected students. You can see here, as of last Monday, we had 2,156 students. 256 of those were here as of October 13th, so we did get them counted for the first half of the year's funding. So the remainder of 1,900 who've enrolled since the survey period in October, those are what we have not received any funding so far. We will include those in our projection for February, or actually this week, assuming they're here in the count this week, we'll receive that second half of the year's funding.
And this is a moving number. We are continuing to see some students move and relocate, more of them to other areas where there's more housing than actually going back to the island.
All right, so how do all these FTE numbers translate into funding? The change between the second calc and the third calc, you see we've received an additional $12,750,000, 2.82% increase. And then our per student funding actually went down just slightly, by 0.1%. And as we mentioned before, our district is still ranked 64th out of 67 in total funding
Why
per
did
student.
our per student go down?
I can't answer that exactly. I'd have to look into all the various categories of what changed. Do you know off the top of your head?
Part of it was
Impact
the
of that?
lottery funding we didn't receive, because more of that went to the school recognition awards statewide, which reduced our share of lottery funding. That was one of the major changes.
Okay, so that $12.7 million that we've added to our revenues as a result of the third calc. This next slide shows where that money's been allocated to so far. Second line is additionally, I'll just mention, due to our P-card rebate program that we've implemented as part of the strategic plan, that's really up and running. So we've actually increased our revenue estimate for this year. We've already seen over 100,000 additional come in, so we went ahead and added that in here.
Why did 5 million go to charter schools?
That is their proportionate share of the increase in students, the funding that they receive for that.
So
And
based
remember
on
the-
this, they got just short of half our students. then.
Right, and well, remember that's a big chunk of that is the additional
the
830 going to Florida Cyber.
Cyber.
So these dollar amounts are directly related to that breakdown of the increase in students.
Wow.
Their increase in FTE is over $2 million, almost $2.3 million for that one school alone.
And their increase in a per student, since it's all online, is 0. Their incremental increase,
Well, they have more teachers.
if it's online.
No, I don't. They don't have brick and mortar.
But why do you have more teachers?
So you're going to teach so many courses.
But one person doesn't teach 18 kids, one person can teach. If it's just an online course, can't more than 18, I don't know how it works though.
They can absorb some more additional students, but they will have to hire some additional staff.
So the hurricane repairs that we occurred here in our county as a result of Irma, we ended up spending just over $700,000 that we had to dip into our reserves for at the time. So we're now able to offset, and that is money we will receive back from FEMA at a later date, most likely a couple years down the road. So obviously we have to go ahead and dip into our funding for that. The Dory Schlossberg money, we actually reduced our revenue estimate there. We're seeing less revenue come in as a result of less traffic tickets. And then the next two items are actual positions that we've added, and included in the handout we have a breakdown of those. So as Dr. Pace mentioned, we haven't necessarily added enough teaching positions to meet class size for the second half of the year with all the new students, but we have been adding a lot of additional support.
That's slide 2 or page 2 of your handout.
Page 2, the blue line sheet, has a list of all those positions.
Deborah, what's your quick perspective on that, not being able to keep up with the classroom instructional, but having to add all the support pieces because of all the additional support required? Overly concerned about that? It's okay, we're doing okay. What's your take? How would you quantify or define this scenario?
You know, our teachers are having to do more, absolutely, having to serve more children and more English language learners as a result of that. I mean, there's definitely a stress on the system. However, we also know that with the teacher shortage being what it is, it's difficult to find enough teachers, and we're not at a place in the year where you can add portables or add additional classrooms. So even adding additional teachers often is creating co-teach situations. So it's not ideal, but we're making the best of the situation that we have, particularly because the population is still fluid, in terms of coming and going. So do we ramp up for 2,000 students to stay with us a year from now? Do we not? It's a rough estimate there in terms of what we're doing. But we've really worked hard to try to offer bilingual support. And Ms. Reyes and her team are doing a fabulous job on additional professional learning, pushing in to offer support for new programs in our schools, just really making it a point of emphasis everywhere we go.
As we start looking into the next budget cycle, do you think that the position will shift, assuming that the numbers stay the same? We're not having students come and then go, but we expect them to be here. Do you think that you're going to have to adjust this model?
Absolutely.
Going into the next calendar year?
Yes.
Next school year?
I think we'll need more teachers, and I think we'll need more support at the district and school level. That's one of the things that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
What percentage of our teachers are truly bilingual? Best guess.
I don't know that number. I wouldn't have any idea, but we can find out.
I think that'd be good for all of us to know that.
Okay.
All right, and then the next page in the handout just shows the additional support that we had added to our transportation department. So we added some clerk typists and then 2 additional area managers in that area to help.
What's just the real, I don't want to get off topic, but what's the real quick update on that as far as additional drivers? How are we doing? Gaining 10, losing 8?
We had 6 new drivers start after Christmas, but then we did have, I think there were like 4 resignations or retirements that came in. Last week we had 10 additional drivers start, and on Friday we had a very successful job fair. They interviewed 48 driver candidates. Some of them already had CDLs, and so Tammy and the Human Resources team has been pushing those people through this week, and we're starting a new training class next week that we expect to be full. So we're starting to close the gap between routes that are uncovered. Yesterday was not a good day for transportation. As we saw all over the world, people decided that after the Super Bowl they were too tired or whatever to come to work. And
Did that include bus drivers?
That included bus drivers. unfortunately, but today
I didn't
was.
get that memo for some reason.
Yeah.
I missed the
was at
memo
work.
too. I was
I
here.
missed that.
I was here bright and early. But some folks were not. But today we were down to just one route that they were having to cover in other ways. So I think we're turning the corner. Matthew Tuckman in our community relations team did a fantastic job working with local business partners and got free billboard space last week because it was Transportation Week across the country. So got free billboard space, free airtime on Mix 105.1 and a couple of other radio stations to advertise the job fair. I happened to be on I-4 Saturday afternoon by the Mall of Millennia and saw the big billboard with the Osceola County School District's transportation fair. So we really got a lot of bang for our buck for absolutely zero cost to the school district. So
Right.
strong community support and
So
good
we're-
results.
So we're chipping away at
We're
it.
chipping away at it.
Thanks, Randy.
And actually, the next item on here was the tiered salary schedule for transportation. So as part of our salary package that we negotiated with the Teamsters this year, we increased our starting salary for bus drivers, and along with that, we moved to a tiered salary schedule. So that was the cost to implement that. Our TSL grant, which we are now in the first year of, the Teachers and School Leaders Grant, there is a match component of that we have to fund out of the general fund. So that's the $236,000. Next item is our school discretionary operating. So all of our schools get discretionary operating dollars based on a formula based on how many students they have. So as we continue to grow, that's the additional funding that'll go to the schools for the extra growth they've seen throughout the year. And then the last two items are startup supplies for our new high schools. All right, so moving into talking about the current status of the state budget for the upcoming school year. We're currently in the middle of the legislative session. The House and the Senate have both produced their first FEFP budget runs, and while they look somewhat similar as far as the bottom line, they're actually very different in terms of how they've put their proposals together. One of the first major differences is actually how they've handled the base student allocation. And you can see here, the House took an approach somewhat similar to what we usually see, and so they have funded the additional student growth that's projected for the upcoming year, and they've increased the BSA slightly, an increase of $75.20, which equates to 1.79%. The Senate, on the other hand, has actually decreased the base student allocation, and they've shifted more of their funding into specific restricted categories, which we'll talk about in a minute. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's one big difference. Is it's pretty unusual to see the base student allocation actually going down when you're providing additional funding. Total funding per unweighted FTE. You see the House proposals going up 1.36%, and these are numbers for Osceola. The statewide number is actually 1.37, so pretty similar in the House's budget. And then the Senate looks like it's going up more by 1.86%, but as I mentioned, there are some specific restricted categories in there. So that bottom line, what we've done is we've tried to show the impact of what's actually happening to the unrestricted funding per student under the Senate's proposal. So you'll see that we would actually be losing money on a per student basis.
Is our lobbyist aware of this and working with the Senate on it?
He's definitely aware of this. What we're hearing is that, and what we've used so far in our budget projections, is to expect something much more similar to what we're seeing coming out of the House right now.
Okay.
And one reason for that does have to do with the RLE. So the House has maintained their position of no tax increases. However, they are allowing for new construction. They are now allowing the millage rates to incorporate that. So that's producing some additional revenue in the House's budget. But the Senate, on the other hand, they have gone ahead and held the RLE flat, so allowing that growth to continue to fund the formula.
This is the rollback?
Yes, so the House is continuing to roll back, essentially, with some exceptions. The Senate would not be rolling back. So they would actually hold the RLE flat. So as the tax roll increases,
We start to benefit.
you would capture that
Plans.
benefit.
What's the chances of that happening?
And that's,
Well, and again, going back to the fact that, but even though the Senate starts out with a greater budget, because they're tying in things like the teacher salary allocation for the best and brightest and all that kind of stuff, per student funding would actually go down in the Senate proposal.
and so that is the other piece, is that right now there's about 400 million outside of the FDFP formula, which is going for the best and brightest bonuses, and that's the teachers that have the SAT, ACT percentage over 80%, as well as the 1,200 and 800 bonuses for all classroom teachers that got put into effect last year. That's all currently about $400 million sitting outside of the FEFP. The House would maintain that. The House's proposal would maintain that. The Senate, on the other hand, is rolling the 1,200 and 800 teacher bonuses into the FEFP, so essentially shifting funding to allow that RLE to fund that rather than having a separate pot of money. And the other piece of that then is that they're really using that to offset the total pot of money to shift more into higher education. So that's why we see the decrease here, is they're actually shifting money, while we're putting more money in by allowing the millage rate to rise, there's more money going into the total pot, but then K-12 seeing less and more is getting shifted into higher ed, which is the Senate President's priority. So it's a little bit of a shell game in terms of
Is there any
being
kind-
able to look at
Is
those.
there any kind of legislative priority to help those districts that are not part of the House Bill 7069 lawsuit?
No.
Okay.
So as we mentioned, those teacher bonuses are an additional part that's factored into the Senate's FEFP run, as well as a couple of other new allocations. One is $40 million for mental health allocation. We would get our share of that, which is just under $1 million. There's another allocation for Hope Schools, $88 million being specifically set aside for that, and we would not receive any of that.
We don't get any of that.
And exactly, we don't want to be in that situation, but that's also $88 million of the entire pot that we would not see a penny of. They've also added in a funding compression adjustment, which is something new, and that would help our district. That would actually provide an additional $5.3 million to our district next year, and that's working our way on getting us up to that average cost per student, or average funding per student. So while we say we're 64 out of 67, there's a component built into the Senate's proposal that would help all the districts that are below average to get up, either up to the average or up to at least $100 extra per student, whichever is less. And so for us, it'd be $100 extra per student. Not sure where that's going to go or where that really came from, but that is part of the Senate's proposal right now.
The average of what?
Per student.
Oh, okay. Not a performance.
Trying to get
average.
everybody to, what, 34 or 33?
Right.
That could be an answer to the DCD question, because I believe the Senate Education Chair is from Volusia. Am I correct?
Senator Hugel.
Yes. So that could be
Different
a
way of
way to
going
get
about
around
it.
the DCD. Just, hopefully they're not watching.
Well, they must hire somebody just to come up with it, spread like the cost compression method, and clearly it's like the simplified tax code.
The last bullet point on here, the House proposal contingent on passage of House Bill 7055. So House Bill 7055 is the new education policy bill for this year coming out of the House. And Speaker Corcoran has indicated last week that passage of this budget would be contingent on accepting those policy bills. So that's definitely one thing to keep an eye on as well.
What is in those policy bills that we need to be, that's bad for us?
The relief, more vouchers for kids who have been bullied,
Yes,
more
the
money for
bullied
Hope
kids
Schools,
charter.
those types of things.
vouchers for bullied kids.
So giving vouchers to the bullies or the kids that were?
To the kids that are, you know what, probably would be working out better the other way, but, no, it's,
He said,
we get to keep, we get to keep the bullies.
Never gonna look.
And which, by the way, you know, I mean, we could probably turn this around to help us somehow, but I don't know yet. So the whole thing is that if a child says they're bullied, then they could apply for a voucher, and I believe that's being paid out of some tax diversion of some sort.
it is just on the,
Right?
it's just on the kids saying I was bullied?
Pretty much.
Okay, so there's no, that's not subject to
There
abuse
is,
at all?
John Boyd has done a pretty significant analysis of House Bill 7055 that he sent us today. I haven't had a chance to really look at it, but I will send that to all of you.
What is the partner bill in this? Is 2,500? No. What is the partner bill in the Senate? Is there one?
I don't
I
think
don't
there
believe
is.
there is
I
one.
don't think there is yet.
I thought that's where we were attaching,
Well, that's where, I think that's where it's gonna go, yeah. 70-55
In there.
in the end.
okay, great. So we gotta go for that one.
My fear is that anything that gets passed, the charters are gonna attach some kind of language that's beneficial to them. Any education bill, they're gonna glom on and put something on it.
All right,
So be
so
it.
moving on, this is just our FTE growth over the years that we're used to seeing, adding next year's projection on here. You see at the bottom, our projection for next year is 4.41% increase. We've been running kind of around 3 on average prior to this year. And about 1,000 of those students, or the other half of the students we got from Puerto Rico this year that are not being counted in this year's funding.
Gotcha.
So that's part of that. If you strip that out, we're actually showing about 2.8, 2.9% growth projected for next year.
So based on the DOE's growth projections, we are not gonna grow another student from 2018-19 school year to the 2027 school year, right? Because
Well-
we've already picked up the 7,000?
In June, we will be updating our copy projections.
I'm glad you saw the map. I'm glad you saw the map.
So how does that work when I'd just like to know how that works when the COFTI projection comes back the next year. How does that change? How does that change what they,
It doesn't, they routinely will
They have different models, so the model that's more heavily weighted for the most recent year, it will increase as a result of our current year growth.
They intentionally project a lower population than we have every year since I've been on the school board, so it's a shell game with
I
funding.
understand.
That's fine.
what's that?
So,
Call it what it is in a reconciliation. The budget.
There isn't a record, yeah, well, okay. You find
All
a
right.
reconciliation.
So slide 10 again is our FTE growth, but broken down by program. And a couple that we just want to highlight here. 130, our ESOL program, you can see the significant growth we've had in that over the years. And obviously we're projecting more growth there for next year because we know over 80% of our additional growth students from Puerto Rico are obviously English language learners. So huge jump in that area. As well as our CTE area, program 300 at the bottom. As you know, we've been ramping up our CTE programs and really growing there. So we've seen a big jump this year and are projecting that going forward as well with our new programs.
If we have students at TICO that are adults, do they count any of our numbers or do not count?
Not for FTE, they don't count.
Okay. So this 1,400 are K-12 or
This is all
Right,
K-12.
adult ed
Whatever you
is
call it,
funded
yeah.
through a different formula.
And then just showing our FTE in a different format. And you can see kind of the yellow lines at the top represent the charter. So obviously as we're growing, we know that our charters are growing in proportion as well, along with McKay. And we've made a concerted effort in that area, but you can still see the growth there.
I've got a question. It's really Dr. Pace's question. Charters versus our schools in Osceola County. Traditionally, have we looked at what they pay versus what we pay? Are they at 90% of what we pay, 80% of what we pay, in terms of teacher wages?
I've not looked at that since I've been on board, but we certainly can.
I think that would be very illuminating for all of us. And then the issue then becomes, okay, if they're paying 70, 80, 90% of what we're paying, how are their results? Are they doing better than spending less money, or are they doing worse?
We definitely compare results, and we've done that over test and by grade level, so we definitely look at that.
And when we see their budgets, typically their salaries are slightly less. But also remember, they don't offer the benefits.
Right,
They're
no,
typically
it's
not
a whole package, I get
FRS
it.
and our health insurance
I get it,
benefits.
it's an entire package, I understand.
We're struggling to find teachers, and they seem to be getting teachers. Do we do anything proactively to show that as a benefit?
They have struggled to get teachers as well,
I was gonna say, I've been hearing
significantly.
they've been struggling as well.
But if our total package with benefits is 20 or 25% more, do we, I don't know if advertise is the right word, but
We
communicate that?
we definitely recruit, yes.
And Clarence, what I've seen a lot of is there's a lot of new teachers who sometimes they can't catch on with the school district, and they go work there for a year or two to get that under their belt, and then we hire them.
All right. So, as I mentioned before when we were talking about the state budget and the House and the Senate's proposals, what our lobbyists have told us is at this point, plan on something very similar to the House's current FEFP run. So what we've done is we've taken that, and based on that, Osceola would be receiving $24.4 million more next year based on our projected growth. So what we've done here is we've gone ahead and allocated that out based on things we know will be increasing next year, things we know we will need to be adding, et cetera.
And as well address some of the things that you guys have identified that you wanted us to see us address.
And Sarah, when you mentioned lobbyists, you're referring to Rutledge's group, right? That's the
Correct.
Jessica and Corinne.
And Jim Hamilton.
Yeah, Jim Hamilton primarily. So I don't know if you want me to kind of talk through these. The holdback for undistributed FTE, that's what we always do just until we really know where the students are going to show up and in which schools. We usually hold some back so we're not allocating all of our funding up front. So that equates to about 500 students. The $6.1 million is how much of the additional growth will be going to our charter schools. And that does include 4 new charter schools opening next year. Somewhat small, that's 440 students that we're anticipating going to those new charter schools. As Dr. Pace mentioned, we did try to address some of the board priorities, and some of those were to reduce the elementary VE caseload, so we've allocated some additional positions there. Additional transportation support, guidance. We had already added some guidance for the Title I schools. This is to get our ratios up for in elementary. And then additional ELL support, which we all know we're going to continue to need.
If you look back at the guidance piece, if you remember this last year, that was one of the things that the board has really talked about since I came on board, was trying to reduce our student counselor ratio. We made some real progress this year in our middle schools. So middle schools with over 750 students were added an additional counselor. I'm going to be honest, in the beginning, some of the middle school principals were like, well, why can't we just have a dean or something else? We said, no, this is strictly for guidance. It's been invaluable. The feedback that we've received from our middle school principals has been, this is really helping to make a difference with our kids and addressing that social emotional need. So this would allow us to extend that also then to the non-title elementary schools. And the additional ELL support would be to increase our ELL compliance specialists at the elementary level. We did that last year at the high school level. We've added additional teachers and staff, but we feel like we also are going to have to ramp that up at the elementary level now. So that's, again, trying to address some of those needs.
Is this the earmarked kind of mandatory ELL funding out of this 20 million, or is this discretionary?
It's out of the
ELL?
operating budget.
But is it kind of the money that's earmarked from the state that has to go to ELL?
Part of it would be the
Some of that
weighted
will.
funding we're receiving for those ELL students.
Okay.
If that's what you're asking.
The $960,000.
Right.
Yeah,
There's-
so it's not a specific restricted pot of money for ELL.
Okay.
But it is
Because we
those
do
students that
receive
are,
a certain amount of extra funding for ELL students.
that weighted funding for those students is what Jose's referring to.
Okay, but that's not included in this
So
number.
that will fund part of this, but we're funding even more than that out of
Gotcha.
discretionary.
This isn't like the ESE guaranteed allocation that comes out of the state FEFP formula. For ELL, there's no specific pot of money in the state budget that says you have to spend this on ELL, but we get the increased
You
weighted
just get it.
funding.
You just get it.
Right, and that
And this
increased
is
weighted
it.
funding is in the 24 million.
It's included.
And that's one of the things that we would be directing it to.
Gotcha.
The
That's
federal
kind-
dollars are,
kinda getting around
include
to
some
that.
specific for ELL.
Dr. Pace.
No, because we know we have more needs there. Sorry.
Yes.
Chad.
Okay,
So
no,
we-
that's okay. You mentioned that the additional guidance counselors have been seen as invaluable in the middle schools. And I think that's great, and you know, I'm all for, so if they're invaluable in the middle schools, and we see that there's an opportunity to shore it up also in the elementary schools, what about in the high schools where you've got guidance counselors with 600 and 700 kids?
When we looked at our counselor ratios at the high school level, particularly because every high school also has a college and career counselor, we really weren't out of whack in comparison to other districts. It was primarily our middle school and elementary schools that had one guidance counselor, whether they had 500 kids or 1,200 kids.
Right, I understand that.
So
I
that's where
guess-
we felt like the need was the greatest.
So what is that ratio in high school then?
About 400, 450 to 1, yeah.
Okay, it's better. It used to be 600
Yeah.
or 700. Okay, that is better. Thank you.
That's compared to other districts, though. That doesn't mean that other districts are doing it right.
No, but the 400 to 450 is not a bad number. I mean, you could always decrease that by adding more guidance counselors. And if that's something the board wants us to look at, we certainly can.
Isn't the
I just don't know that that's the greatest priority right now that I see.
Isn't the recommended national average like 250 to 300 for high schools?
Well, I'm sure it's recommended probably 100.
No, they thought 250 to 300.
Right, 250 is the recommended according to Dr. Fritz, but very few make it.
In Florida.
Is that national?
And remember as well,
I'm
we've
sure
added
Florida
support
actually
for our
funded.
schools in that same area by adding the full-time ESE compliance specialists at our high schools and the full-time ELL compliance specialists. Because those folks are acting in not the true guidance counselor role, but providing support to the students and their families who are ESE and ELL.
Oh, and we're doing a great job. I'm not knocking what we're doing. I'm just, I mean.
We can always do better. It's
Right,
just a
I mean,
matter of,
if you
this is
got-
the budget, which way do we want to cut it up?
I get it. I get it.
All right, so the 5.4 million is the additional instructional staff that we will be adding in order to meet class size. And that incorporates next year's growth as well as the pieces that we already mentioned we're not necessarily meeting as of this week. So we'll be adding slightly more there. As well as support staff for the new schools, that's the 2.5 million. As you know, as we open a new school, all the support staff positions that come along with that, that is for Topeka High School and Neo City Academy. Then the TSL grant match, again, that's a 5-year grant, and each year our match ramps up higher, so it's just under $600,000 for next year. The FRS rate bill has come out, and so we are expecting to see that increase again this year, about $500,000. Which the district will have to fund. We've gone ahead and projected our utilities and fuel increases. We're hoping to see a decline in our utilities. However, with adding 2 new high schools, we know that the total is still going to continue to grow. We've also added in the discretionary operating for the new schools. The VPK teacher pilot, there's just a small amount that we're going to have to fund out of the general fund for that. That's $19,000.
What this would allow us to do, board members, is to basically do almost an action research project. In that typically now our VPK classrooms are staffed by a lead and a para. We would like to try making that lead a certified teacher in early childhood education at the 4 classrooms at the Ross Jeffries VPK site, and then compare our results in terms of kindergarten readiness.
That's great.
There's been quite a bit of research done on a national level and even across the state. A colleague of mine in Brevard did a study, and it didn't show tremendous gains in terms of kindergarten readiness. But there's still a part of us that just seems to think that a certified teacher as opposed to a lead could make a difference in kids. And this would allow us to try it at that one site.
Sarah, let me go back to the utility. Mark Clinch. OUC, Duke, and KUA are the 3 service providers that we work within.
Yes, sir.
OUC and Duke, they provide energy discounts for us.
Energy rebates.
Energy rebates. KUA does not.
That's correct.
We're KUA's largest customer in their service area.
51% of our school district, yes.
What percent?
51%.
And we are KUA's largest customer?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know you and I have had some conversations about this. That's why I kind of went straight to you. I think the board, just so that you guys are aware, there's, I think, a conversation that needs to continue with KUA in regard to these rate opportunities for the school district. Utility costs are going to continue to go up, as we know. Even though the actual cost may be going down, the size and scale of our district is going to increase. Mark, so you know, and I won't get into the details because I don't know the details, but Mark's been working hard and trying to move the needle with KUA, I think is a fair way to say that. But I think it's an important conversation for the board to be aware of as well, and those of us or those of you that have an opportunity to talk to KUA board members or the executive staff about the need for an opportunity to partner with the school district on some rebate opportunities for us would be important.
I'm fine with that. Are the rebates from OUC and Duke Energy, are they significant rebates, or are they $2,000?
They're pretty significant. For example, the 4 chiller replacement projects that we completed last summer netted us about $40,000. So, you know, those are projects that were about $1.5 million. If you equate that to
So are these rebates based on things we're doing? They're not just, okay, you paid us $3 million, you get 1% back?
No.
Now, it's
They're
based on
specific replacement,
specific
okay.
components, cool roof, reflective roof.
Okay.
Your chillers that need a minimum efficiency, the pumps, the motors, occupancy sensors, those types of things.
Gotcha.
But as we continue to improve our envelope, our infrastructure within our facilities, as we continue to build new schools, I mean, those are the opportunities for us to really capture those rebates where for the last decade, maybe there wasn't as much of an opportunity for rebates because we weren't doing a lot of that stuff. Now we're moving pretty hard and fast, and there's opportunities that are being left on the table because we don't have a function and an ability to capture that. So,
And this historically, municipal utilities don't typically offer rebates. I know Gainesville Regional has, OUC's got some, but it's usually the investor on the Dukes, the FP&Ls, the TECOs. It's a different mindset, and they do. But you know, if we can get KUA, they've never really done any rebates. And I think that one of the things that we could do, I mean, I look at what Lakeland Electric, I used to manage the FMPA agreement for Siemens years ago, is that Lakeland Electric, Rooms to Go is a great example. You drive along I-4, they've got like a couple million square feet of space under air. They made a deal with Lakeland Regional that if they didn't do any solar, renewables, things like that, they would get 15% on a long-term contract off the retail rate, which was substantial money. And I think that, you know, there's really, other than maybe being a good neighbor, there's not a lot of incentive. KUA they don't know how to do that necessarily. And I'm not suggesting they shouldn't, just it's a different mindset than Duke and FP&L.
that's good. That's fair. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so we also, at the bottom, you see we also added some additional district support positions for next year, and those are detailed on the following slide.
And again, board members, these are our recommendations as a staff based on working to provide adequate support for the growth that we've experienced. Obviously, it's all up to, you know, board discussion in terms of what you believe are priorities, but even the things on this page. Clearly, we have to add instructional staff to meet class size. Clearly, we're opening 2 new schools, so there's an additional support staff model that goes along with that, as well as some of these other things. But in terms of the elementary VE caseloads, guidance support for elementary schools, ELL support, and the additional district support that's outlined on this next page, these are things that we believe as a staff we need to continue to provide a level of excellence for our students and our schools, but we're here to hear your priorities as well.
Just a quick question. I think it came up at our last school board meeting with regard to lawn maintenance, turf management. I see that in there.
Yes.
Are we doing a real hard look at shifting our business model on that from outsourcing to increasing the size of our maintenance team?
Yes.
To do that across the district?
Yes.
And all of that is not only based upon the quality of work, which is obviously important, but the actual cost of the work being done?
Yes, Mark
Because for me, it
Cavaney,
would have to be both.
right. Mark Cavaney and Mike Clark have done some real careful analysis of what we're currently spending on some of these contracts and what they believe in terms of man-hour and equipment and all of those things it would take for us to do it. And they believe that we can do it not only better, but also at a better cost and more efficient way to handle it. And we wouldn't do that overnight. It would be a grow as contracts expire. But in particular, to help Caliga High School, for example, opens with all new fields and materials in June. We'll have those fields turned over to us. And we really believe it's an opportunity for us to take hold of the maintenance and care of those athletic fields as well as the general grounds from the very beginning and keep them in good shape.
So-
As opposed to being in a position of 2 years from now, we need to resod a field because it's not been adequately maintained.
So we're going to shift the care of fields to the district and take it away from the school-based management?
That is our recommendation. Particularly when
No,
you're
I'm-
talking
I'm
about your
fine.
athletic fields, the level of equipment that you need is different. The expertise that you need for the chemicals and all those types of things is different. And building in those kinds of cyclical cycles will help maintain the quality of the field so that we're
I'm
not
good
in a
with that.
condition of dying. We're past the days where we can rely on our coaches to maintain those on their
That
own.
is true.
Like they used to in the
When
day
they made, yeah,
when
they
you were
made
playing
their,
football.
when they made their kids go out and,
Straight the field.
Yeah, that's not what I want our, yeah, that's
Mow
not
the
what I
grass.
want our students doing on
I straight
Friday.
baseball diamonds. And
You know,
I've got pulled out of class
I
several times
remember
to
when
go work on the
I was a
football
high school
field.
principal
Sound
and my
bitter at all,
daughter's,
Mr. Booth.
No,
I was a high
actually,
school-
it was fun.
I used to
I
water-
shouldn't even
used to
share
pull the
this,
water
but-
truck.
Yep.
I was a high school principal and my daughter was in biology honors and the first Friday of football, they were gonna go line the field and I said, oh, no. Not doing that with the biology honors kids, with any kids. So this is the direction that we believe as a staff would get us to a higher efficiency and effective level. Also experienced this in Brevard. They have a team that does their athletic maintenance and the quality of the fields and the longevity of them
I can
was
see that.
much higher.
Do we have that technical person that really knows how to do this on
We're
staff?
developing, Mark has some and developing more.
And landscaping and maintenance of the schools, is that, are you talking about that as well?
As we move forward. Some of the schools are doing a good job of doing that on
Sure.
their own. Some of them have contracts. What we found is that our contracted services are not keeping up with the level of
I'd
quality
like
that we
to,
want.
what I'd like to see is, show me a school district that has really, really nice facilities, clean, well-maintained, really nice groomed, manicured maintenance, you know.
It's called Osceola County, man.
I was just
I
gonna
don't
say
know, I
that.
mean, the best
I was
is
gonna say
best. And then tell me how they do it, unless, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here.
No,
Let's
we
find
don't wanna
somebody
try to
who's doing it
reinvent
really
the
well, and let's do it. Because I do believe in the appearance of the school should, you know.
Oh, if you don't have a clean school, that school's not going to do very well.
That's right.
And part of that is our Sterling process in terms of looking at how other people are doing it well and what we can learn from that and getting better with continuous improvement and also establishing clear metrics. So that'll be a part of our Sterling exploration in Goal 3 as the maintenance department works through that this year.
I'm just curious, with Toho High School opening up and everything that it's got, you know, one of the lessons learned, and it's an expensive lesson, was in Celebration High School, we put that turf field in, but that turf field is not just used for sports. I mean, it's used all day long, all weekend long by everybody. LSU was out there practicing for their bowl game, but I mean, the point is, I mean, it's not, you know, in the past, I mean, the field there, you can only use it game day for, you know, I mean, now you got marching band using it, you got PE classes using it, you've got, every team is practicing on it, and I recognize that we did it because we're
I'd be a
significant
pretty big,
musicians.
one of them 6-digit numbers you'd have to add in there.
I know, no,
Jay.
I get it, but it's just, I don't know, it always drives me crazy that, to your point, the fields aren't used.
7 did.
They're not,
That's
I
right,
mean,
yeah, 7. I meant to say 7.
yeah,
Sorry.
I know. It's, I just like the idea that the facilities get used and used and used and used and used and used and used, and it's used by kids, which is what we want.
But we know celebration is celebration. I mean, not everywhere is right next to Disney World and that side of
It has
town.
a swamp- it was
I doubt
built on a
LSU was
swamp.
going to Harmony, you know, and I doubt the Holy Paul Marching Band is going to borrow the Harmony.
Holy Paul's got a
football
marching
field.
band?
That's my point.
I thought it was Keenan's band.
anytime we're looking at increasing the size of our workforce and expanding the size of government, it's going to give me a pause, as you know.
Correct.
There's value in working with local vendors to provide some of these services and outsourcing some of these things. I would want to really know if we're going to go in this direction. Number one, is there a genuine cost-benefit analysis that's been completed? Can somebody fully outline and articulate that to the board as a business decision? And then if we're starting down this road, what is the real scaling plan for that? We're starting with turf on athletic fields, but really the plan is that in year 2 we're adding this, and in year 6 we're doing this. What is the real plan and strategy? I wouldn't want us to go down the road and not understand the real cost and the benefit associated with it, and I wouldn't want to start without knowing where it is that we're going. It's that begin with the end in mind. So I'd want to know all that before I would personally support something like that.
We will
I'd
absolutely
like
provide
to
you with that
know-
information.
I'd like to know why we have private vendors who we say all the time are not doing their job, but we're still paying them. If I have a maintenance contract and I'm the principal or I'm somebody from the district and I walk out there and the shrubs aren't cut and the grass isn't mowed, I'm not cutting that check. I certainly hope we're not doing that. And so I've heard this for the last 3 years I've been on the district. Well, these private guys aren't getting it done. Well, if they're not getting it done, then why are we paying them until they finish and complete the job that they were signed up to do? I wouldn't pay somebody that I hired if they didn't complete their task. Why are we paying people that haven't completed their task?
And we are working through that with a couple of schools. It's just-
Because I would have some of the same feelings as Mr. Weisshire on moving to adding more employees at the government level when we have private companies out there doing the work and we know can do it a lot of times less expensive.
I
And is
know,
Mr. Booth's lawn maintenance operator? By the way, I'll be at your house sometime.
I'm my own lawn maintenance operator. Probably should get
Everything
somebody
he
else
said
to
I
do
agree
it.
with, because there's the other side of that as well, which accountability with those that are doing work for the district and making sure they're providing the value that they're being compensated for.
Yeah.
well, and soon after I got on the board, I seem to remember meeting after meeting after meeting where we're kicking somebody out
Yeah.
and we're hiring a new
Correct. Yeah.
maintenance group. And it gets back to my question. I mean, this turf management stuff and keeping the fields so they last a long time, I'm all for that.
Yep.
But that's somebody who knows what they're doing. And maybe in our RFPs for these people outside, it gets back to the low bid thing. We need to know that it should cost $100,000 a year, or whatever it is, to do 5 schools or whatever.
Correct.
So when somebody comes in and bids 50, we need to say, no, we're not doing that.
No, that's absolutely
So,
correct.
I mean, some of it, I think, is a little bit incumbent on us to figure out how to do the RFP
Yeah, let's
where
get
it
the right
lays out
process in place.
the point that you know, whatever the judgment is, and also having the knowledge to know what it should cost and say there's, can't be done.
And that's the same conversation Mark and I just had before the meeting, Cavaney, about our water treatment and the importance of making sure that we're paying somebody enough money to actually do the work that they say they're going to do to preserve our chillers. And it doesn't do us any good to pay somebody $26,000 when we know it's going to cost them $40,000 to
Yeah,
do the
so
work,
they-
and
so
they're
they're not
never
gonna
going to
do it.
provide the service. And so we're paying the money, not getting the quality, and ultimately we're having deteriorating equipment. That was the exact conversation we just had,
Yeah.
so I agree.
I will definitely get you guys the turf management analysis that Mark's team has done, and we'll provide that information to you. Did you want to walk through any of these other positions? Are there other questions that you have? I know it looks like a lot, and we have not added at the district level for a long time. But with the growth that we've had, particularly in some of our needs, you saw from our FTE report, the growth that we've had in ELL, the growth that we've had in CTE, all of that along comes with student services and the social emotional needs. Those departments have not had additional support since I was here, and we had 50,000 students, not 67,000 students. So I really feel like those are a need. Again, the same kinds of things that we were dealing with human resources and payroll, just getting more and more people on board. We onboarded 1,200 people this year. And then our secondary resource teachers. This year we've really focused on the ELA and math. We've struggled to find somebody to really look at what our AVID program can do. We don't have anybody for social studies or for science at the level, and then the other one is the grant funded. Most of these would be at least partially, if not all, funded out of our title dollars. With the resource teachers, our recommendation is that you would do a 90-10 split so that you could use them across all schools, not just in your Title I schools.
So the one question I was going to ask was regarding the AVID resource teacher. I'm okay with that. Obviously, I'm a big believer in support of the AVID program, but I'd want to understand how many AVID instructors we have across the district, what the current utilization of the AVID program is across our county, and then what the exact role and what the benefit this individual is going to provide. And then again, what's the plan? Is it to provide that extra layer of support for what's in place, or is it laying the groundwork for an expansion of AVID in the next few years? I'd like to understand that.
Absolutely. That is the direction that we want to go, is to expand AVID. I feel like it has a tremendous benefit in all of our schools if we could get it there. But there is, number one, a cost involved. There's a coordination part in terms of the training that goes along with supporting the AVID coordinators at the site level. There's an organization of the mentoring that goes along with having AVID. All of those things come into play, but we can get you a more specific description for that, as well as where the numbers we are now and where we want to expand.
Yeah,
As you
really
know,
interested.
Narcoossee Middle is our first AVID national demonstration school. Just last week, they had the site visit, a tremendous accomplishment for Mr. Talimko and his team. Mr. Allen and Ms. Clayton have been very supportive of that process, and we want to grow that because it really does make a difference when it's a school-wide program as opposed to just an elective.
When I spoke at the National AVID Conference, I brought up the fact of what we've been doing and the fact that we had that school in the process, and I'm pretty certain they'll have me come back to speak at their conference next year. We got really good reviews on that. So the more we can do and the more I know about what's happening with our work in that area, I think the better off it would be to highlight the great successes that we're doing in our county.
Okay.
Dr. Pace, I think that it's a great idea that we're adding positions here. I think we've been understaffed for a while, but insofar as AVID, I mean, AVID is, is a winner, but, in terms of people, and not to name names, but I will, Aaron Williams and Kelly Myers, I mean, they know AVID backwards and forwards. And I've worked firsthand with both of them. I mean, you couldn't go, I mean, I don't know if they'd have an appetite for it. You couldn't go wrong with either one of them.
Oh, you want one?
I'm good. I don't need one.
No,
If there are any other positions that you want to talk about, otherwise I can talk about them with you individually, and then the next slide goes into our long range.
I think Mr.
forecast.
Thacker
Yeah,
had something,
I've
and
got
then I'd want to say
More
one.
of it, mine's more of a generic question, I guess. And I know the jury's still out on this, but we've kind of got an interesting experiment going on at Central Elementary School. And I know it's got a grant that's tied to it and everything else. But if that really does pay off, and it really does show marked student performance, and I know it's probably not in this year's number, but next year, are there some things in this category that are helping to lead to that success that we should be looking to replicate that without the grant? I mean, I know there's a grant there helping it, but I hope we're using that to foster other changes, if it indeed works.
Right. The LSI piece is all about building capacity, and we're using that across the district as well as at that particular school. And then our student services team is supporting, along with Leslie's team out of Title, the community wraparound services that we've been trying to provide there.
I'd just like to follow up with saying, I'm glad that you feel
Right.
obligated to tell us about these districts and explain and rationalize and validate all these. But, for the public, and I wish there was more of them here, if you take this sheet right here where we're funded on our per student, you say administrative costs, you can turn it over and look like that. And we're at the very top of that list, at the lowest. And so I don't necessarily know that that's the best way to operate all the time, to have the lowest administrative costs, but I do think it means that we take seriously what happens in our classrooms and at the school level. And so I do appreciate that you and your staff and everyone tries to keep those administrative costs.
It
low.
absolutely-
And I enjoy saying that when I'm out.
It absolutely
in public as
remains
well.
our top priority to support dollars to the classroom as much as we possibly can. But people are dying. I mean, we're tasked
I'm fine.
with the level of growth that we have here.
No,
And I'm asking a lot of my team. They step up to the complaint. They never
Yes, they
complain.
do.
They never challenge. But I think we can be more effective and maintain efficiency with some additional support. So that's my plea. So then that brings us to our long-range forecast.
Okay, so. Suspense music. All right, so we have updated this now, beginning with the 17-18 column, for the third calculation results that we just discussed. So that resulted in our FEFP change per student actually ended up being 1.4% increase over the prior year. The beginning fund balance obviously has not changed, and then the revenues have been updated for the third calculation. Additional revenues that we discussed previously, and we have gone ahead and allocated or appropriated all of that funding at this point. So we're still planning to end the year with a $900,000 surplus, resulting in that ending fund balance of $68.3 million. Down at the bottom, you can see that that's an 8.6% unassigned percentage. So as we've discussed before, as we grow, we are definitely trying to operate a balanced budget now per the board direction, but we also need to start looking at growing our fund balance in proportion to our growth as a district, so that we're not falling behind as we continue to grow. So that's something we'll be talking further with the board about what direction you want us to plan for going forward into the future. But at this point, this has just been updated for the results of the third calc. And if there's no further questions on any of the operating budget, we can move into capital.
Chairman, I don't want to miss it. Can we take a 2-minute recess?
Let's take a 5. Let's take a, or 2. Actually, a 1 is really what it is.
We'll time you.
That's TMI, Mr. Booth.
Let's see.
Go ahead.
All right, so moving into our capital projects fund. Again, have a couple bullet points up on the slides, but if you flip to your handouts. We
Page
have
4.
Yeah, page 4 and 5 have the updated capital plan.
So things highlighted in yellow have been updated.
So, talk through real quick, the first change, which we're all already aware of, was we moved the Neo City Academy School up 1 year. So that funding hasn't changed, it's just been moved up 1 year in the budget. And then.
Moved up closer.
Yes, yes. So the school itself, the physical school, will now be opening in August of 19. So previously, we had that out 1 year further. And then the revenue projections, after the county passed the moratorium, we did discuss that with our business advisory board and talked about how we thought that that might impact our impact fee revenues and as well as sales tax revenues. So we haven't made any changes for the current year, and for both of those, we're running pretty well in line with our projection and our budget, but we did make some changes going out for the following 5 years. So some additional revenue has been stripped out of this plan from the one we saw and discussed previously. Previously, we were projecting our impact fees to continue to increase about 5.5% a year. What we've done now is we're actually expecting them to decrease by 5% next year, and then we're going to hold that number steady. And the same thing with our sales tax revenues.
Why?
So,
Yeah, why?
and this was all conversation with our business advisory board support about what we thought was going to happen with when permits were being pulled, when we thought we would see impact fee revenues rolling in as a result of the building in our community with the moratorium. So this does not the moratorium. This was all based on the moratorium specifically, and I see you shaking your head. So certainly give us your input as well. But
You're
none of this
thinking impact
takes.
fee collections are going to go down next year because of the moratorium.
May go down, but it won't be next year.
That's what you said, right?
And this was a conversation I think we had at our November meeting.
I can't,
So-
I don't,
They're wrong.
I think it was just a reactionary on their part of not quite understanding.
I
how
think
the
there
whole
can be an
process-
impact, but I think it's a couple years out.
Yeah, it's years out.
It's out, and next year it will not go down.
So definitely, we'll take that into consideration. Do you expect us to continue to increase next year,
Oh,
or
I
should we
think,
kind
I
of
think
hold it
next year could
flat?
be hold or even higher.
Okay.
Dude,
So we wanna
I
talk
mean,
about
Tim
those.
and Clarence probably know better.
It would be nice if they would pass.
I think
our
ultimately you'll have an
ordinance.
impact, but I
And
don't, the stuff,
that
there's enough
doesn't-
online
that's not
right now.
incorporated yet.
And the stuff that is caught up in the moratorium will not be coming online next year.
No, and the Fed's raising interest rates is a push into the housing market right now. Everybody wants to buy before rates get too high and affordability gets impacted.
That's why.
In all of
Donald Trump
our
got rid
projections?
That's why Donald Trump got rid of Fed Chairman Yellen, I think, is because she was raising rates. That's why he's putting a new Fed chairman in.
But they still have to go up to curb inflation. I mean, no matter what.
I
it's-
understand.
It's a function of the economy.
But you will see interest rates come back down.
And I'll tell you, all of our projections from the real estate community are that 2018, 2019 still look to be bullish markets, so.
So we can continue to talk about that and revise our revenue projections again. As I mentioned, this was based on the conversation in November. So I think you're right, some of that was probably the thinking at the time initially, but we'll definitely take another look at that.
So,
and incorporate your
one last
thoughts.
comment. When I served on the BAB for a couple of years, I was always a pretty conservative voice in the room saying, because at that time.
Say it's
imagine
not
that.
so.
But everybody was so bullish on real estate, and I was saying no. And part of that was that they were seeing us coming out of 7 through 11, and then they were saying, well, now things are great, we're going to start ramping up. It's like, no, like it's not going to happen the way you think it's going to happen. So I don't say that to say flip the script and all of a sudden it's just gangbusters, but there is still the growth that we're expecting to see, and I appreciate their conservative approach, and I value it, but I think it's too conservative with where we are right now.
And I certainly wouldn't want to see us delay a project because we went really, really conservative on. I mean, I know we want to be right, we want to be conservative, we don't want to overproject, but I don't want to see a project delayed for for something that I think we all have agreed that's probably a little bit flawed.
I
And I'll
hear you.
tell you,
And-
Sarah, the deals that we're doing, I mean, people are buying stuff. I don't see it. I'm telling you, the more I think about it, I mean,
Currently, it's not impacted any of our projects that
Yeah,
were planned.
that'd be the only
That's what I was
time
gonna
it
say.
would
Plan.
concern me.
This
But we
hasn't-
certainly will take this conversation back to the BAB.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
now,
these changes did not cause us to have to knock anything out of the plan.
can I talk about the white fleet very quickly?
That's on, yeah, that's on the next page,
Okay.
isn't it? Yeah, the next page.
Yeah, and actually, you can go ahead and flip the page. That was all on the capacity.
We gotta do
and
bus
tech fee.
replacements first. Vice Chairman,
we're putting them all in white fleet.
and then we'll be at the white fleet.
Never mind. Stand corrected. Sit here and
You're getting ahead of yourself.
listen to the bus replacement conversation.
So we have allocated additional funding for bus replacements. We had about 1.1 million allocated per year, which we know is not enough to get us to the replacement cycle that we desire. So we took Mr. Tucker's recommendation, and we have added an additional 2.1 million to bus replacements in the current year to be able to get us a little bit closer to that replacement cycle and do a little bit of the catch-up, because we know we're still behind in that area.
It also aligned with the recommendation. Remember, we had a study done on our transportation area, and it aligned with their recommendation for how many buses we needed to
So
buy
is
this
that
year.
like 28 buses or something, a little less than 30 buses?
Yes.
Are we allowed to, and are we doing a 7-year depreciation on these vehicles?
We do 30-year depreciation on our buses, or 40. Have you seen some?
Well, no, from a
Yeah.
tax perspective.
Well, because we don't
understand.
have tax implications, so.
See, cities do. How can a city do it and we can't?
Doesn't make
Cities are
any-
depreciating some of their vehicles.
For financial accounting purposes, it wouldn't really matter to us how, there'd be no incentive to depreciate them
okay,
faster.
okay.
That's more of a, for tax purposes.
I know, I understand, but there are cities that are doing that. I don't know why they're doing it.
Yeah, I'm not sure why.
City Kissimmee is doing it with the garbage
Down
trucks.
to.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Maybe
why.
it's because of the enterprise fund, I don't know.
Yeah, the BAB also advised us to decrease our sales tax
I
projections.
mean, we are seeing some minimal wage increase thing. We have more residents that keep pouring into the county. I don't see why we would think our sales tax revenue would go down.
I think some of that was the fear of stunting growth and how much that would impact what's going on in our community. So, as you said, it might have been a kind of a knee jerk at the initial moment.
A quick
So we'll
question.
definitely bring that conversation back up.
Brandy, is there anything new happening in the school bus arena with new technology, cost savings, less expensive buses? I mean, is there anything, is it pretty much they just do what they do, we buy what we buy, it is what it is?
They're yellow,
So
they're
many
low.
vendors out there, that it's pretty competitive. You know, there's better camera systems, more money. Something I did see recently that I liked though was an extended stop bar that would block the actual other lane. Don't know if it's legal yet.
'Cause I know, like, Leon County went to some of their natural
I-
gas and some of those type of things. Is there anything in the technology sector that is really becoming a disruptor for the school bus industry that will end up saving us money or expanding the life cycle of our buses beyond the current 40-year model?
I don't know that it's in the life cycle, but we may need to look at hybrids or electric buses that have both.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I had brought that up, and we were looking at a couple of things here, and kind of going through an exercise to figure out, do we start looking at some of the hybrid models or some of the natural gas models? Of course, we decided it was too expensive, not worth it at the time. But I don't want us to just keep buying and doing what we do because it's what we know. If there's a disruptor in that industry that could all of a sudden bring technology, and we could be not at the leading edge, so we have to be the pioneer of it, but at the front edge of it to where we can start to really benefit in the long run by capturing something that maybe other people aren't looking at. Point simply is, let's just make sure we have our eyes up instead of down, and we don't miss something on the horizon that could save us money.
Well, Sean does sit on a committee that, is made up directors throughout the state. And I have a call into a local one to have a conversation.
Thank you.
In California, for instance, they're not allowed to buy any more diesel buses. They have to use CNG. And in Tulsa, half of their city school district bus fleet, they went to CNG, but when they did it, there was all kinds of grant money available, and they were able to fund half the bus fleet and retool their entire shop and get the fill station all paid for with grant money.
Right.
Those grants are no longer around. So, but yeah, I agree we need to look at it, but one of the things that we did find was because the way our buses are used, it's not like a city bus where it's going 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it made financial sense in that scenario. With us, our buses are more intermittent use, and it just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
Financially.
Well, and even as we look at, shifting our bus maintenance facilities and things like that, it's just the right time for us to be looking to saying, what's on the horizon, and are we really laying the groundwork for the next 25 years of school buses in Osceola County, or are we just going to build what we've always built? That's all.
And
buy
that is
what
one
we
of the
always
things
buy.
that, we may, as depending on time, want to talk a little bit about is the idea of ancillary facilities. I have been reluctant to say that we can spend money on ancillary facilities or property at this point in time, but we're almost at a point at the Horizon bus station where we're going to have to do something. And that's just something for the
And
board
look,
to consider as we
California
move
is a
forward.
beacon of fiscal conservatism.
Well, when you say
We always
when you
wanna
say
do what they
California
do.
did it, I
And
was like, I'm
their
out.
tax base is very low.
And we also want to look at the Illinois pension system. Think about copying that too.
Go ahead.
Okay, so just again with the bus replacements and adding the additional funding there, just want to make sure we have the board support in that area. And I would also recommend that we continue to put a little bit extra money there going
Sure.
forward as we go do our next 5-year plan.
What's a little bit extra?
So we'll increase
How much
that.
is a little bit extra money?
I'll work with Randy and see kind of how we can get to something reasonable that we'll be able to add each year without knowing we can't go full blown to best practice right away.
How much is a bus?
If we're running 350 buses though,
25 or something.
replacing 10 a year,
Just over 100,000 or
doesn't
so.
work.
No, actually, we replaced like 28 last year, and we're 37, I think, we bought this year. So
Including the new
we're actually a
buses.
little bit ahead of our curve.
What are they, Mrs.
And that's
Shapiro?
including some budget for new
Little
bus
over
runs.
100,000.
Yeah, closer to 100.
Just right at 100, a little over 100.
Doesn't matter whether you buy a short one or a long one, straight.
I was gonna say, is it we're the 84 passenger versus the
You buy 84.
70?
Is there any chance that when we buy them, we can get a guaranteed driver with these?
Yeah.
I'm looking
Can
for
we
the
get the auto
auto driver.
Yeah, have they had the Google auto driver for buses yet?
Oh, that's something to look at.
And are we standardizing to a certain brand so we don't have to inventory parts for 17 different kinds of buses?
They're
Now, we
fine.
do have a standard, right? I couldn't tell you what it is, but.
Okay.
do we have, for buses and for our white fleet, a computer program that monitors all of our maintenance to where we've all bought a car that was really good and never required service. We've all bought a car that we took it to the shop once a month for 5 years while we had it, to where we cycled the lemons out and we,
No, that's good.
well, I can tell you, Toho Water, which I'm very familiar with, they've got, and I think it's actually the city of Kissimmee, and I've asked for it here before and I kind of never got an answer, but they've got an unbelievable monitoring program, and they can tell you like the minute that the maintenance cost versus the replacement gets there. They've got a different money situation. They replace far quicker than we do. But, it might make sense to get rid of a bus that's 8 years old because for whatever reason, it's in the shop once a week.
The mechanics and Brian Pointer, who runs it, does do that with the buses, but for the most part, we would just be getting back to that idea about establishing.
And if they have a system that
I-
we need,
why don't you-
we'd love to know
Why
what it
doesn't
is.
somebody talk to, I'll talk to, because I'm pretty sure it's the city of Kissimmee.
The city of Kissimmee, Kareth Fiddler's the public works
Yeah,
director.
let me find
Fleet
out
Management,
which
something.
one, who it belongs to, and why don't y'all talk to them and
Yeah.
see?
We'd
It's a
love-
software program that monitors and does it all.
Yeah,
But
we
we
have
ought to
to
have,
do
it shouldn't be the guy that remembers bus 27's been in
No.
here 5
We
times.
have all that in the computer,
That's
so
probably
we're
what it
able to
is.
see what's been spent over the years.
And we're looking
Fleet maintenance, yeah.
Well, it's also talking about cycling the lemons out, finding that bus 27
yeah.
is kind of not as good as bus 32.
Yeah, I mean, I hear our stories of put a new transmission in a truck and get to the 7-Eleven, then they have to go tow it in and put a new motor in the truck. At some point you say, we're not putting another dime into this thing because it's useless.
Well, we have set up some white fleet procedures.
Okay.
Just now in these budgets.
No, I get, But if we know exactly where things are, it makes it easier to budget it.
And we're-
I mean, I'm not proud of the van that makes the run on the internet all the time with 600 and something thousand.
Actually, no, it doesn't, 600, it's 60,000, I had it painted.
Yeah.
Oh, so we count the miles after the new paint job, so it's good to go.
We're
We're actually looking at the technology out at the transportation centers on how we can Wi-Fi enable some of this that will better allow us to
Sure.
transfer that information. And then we've had a couple of meetings, we have one coming up next week with our partner Cisco to talk about some more of our options.
Yeah. I think all of you have probably realized that this board is not, we will make an investment if it will save us the money on the backside. I mean, I don't think we are scared to do that. So certainly bring those things forward.
So we want to talk about White Fleet. We have, in this budget now, we are recommending to start a specific allocation for White Fleet each year. If you remember, we haven't really had any budget for that. We've just kind of been adding vehicles.
Keep that 85 going.
One by one as we have to.
What do you anticipate that budget to be?
So we are recommending $500,000 for this year to kind of go ahead and get a jump start on some of those that we know have been around for way too long and need to be replaced in accordance with the procedures that Mr. Shater has put together.
Now, I just had to buy a new truck, and it's pretty much a White Fleet truck, but it's painted gray. That ain't gonna go very far.
No, it's,
We feel like if we
Yes, I
can
see
buy
that.
a few a year on
Just a
bid,
few a year,
yes.
okay.
that's 10 trucks.
And we're looking also for more efficient vehicles, so that not everybody needs the F-250.
No,
For
I
some, a
understand.
smaller hybrid, a car, a smaller SUV would make a whole lot more sense.
Sure.
And so we're really looking at what is the most efficient based on the number of miles the person's driving, who or what they might be transporting with them, to make sure we're making good decisions there.
And as our revenues continue to increase year by year, that's one thing we want to talk about is our priorities for how much of that do we want to put towards the more bus replacements, more White Fleet.
Ancillary facilities.
We'll
Make a
need to
recommendation.
start saving up for some ancillary facilities.
Make a
So.
rec- make a rec-
So yeah, so the recommendation that we have in here, like I said, we're adding a 2.1 million more for bus replacements this year. Probably continue somewhere along that for the next couple of years. And then for White Fleet, we were gonna start off with 500,000 and then allocate 300,000 a year after that. So that would be kind of the initial recommendation at this point.
I'm okay with the recommendation if we can find a way to really monitor where we're at.
We need to
I was
monitor.
gonna say, to Claire's point, within 3 years, I was, I'd want to, I guess, I'm not gonna be here, but what I would say is, you want to review and say, okay, is this the right number, wrong number, why is it right, why is it wrong?
I'm pretty sure Cavaney just told me the White Fleet's not a problem and he doesn't need anything new, right? And did I misunderstand that?
Wrong conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, he did feed the horse hay, so everything's moving right.
Well, you gotta remember there's a cost when you send a crew of 3 or 4 people out to do something and they sit there for 4 hours
Yeah.
and do nothing, in addition to fixing it.
Payroll costs what payroll costs.
All right, so the last item on our list, for Tohopekawega High School, our budget for that school was 88 million, if you remember. We've looked at the FF&E budget. We've continued to meet every month to reassess our budget there as we work through the year and make our purchases. And our FF&E budget was $7.5 million total for this high school, which was based on X percentage of the total project budget. That budget was also pretty comparable to the last high school we built 10 years ago. So when we really started.
I was gonna say,
Here we go again.
here's the setup.
Haven't we all
Here's the
done
pitch.
So here, so
$3
we,
million will cut.
Just one.
we're,
I meant total.
we're
Not in addition to.
I was thinking it was gonna be pretty extra. So.
well, and actually, when we look at it by category, it's really, if you think about it, it really makes sense that that technology category would be significantly more costly than it would have been 10 years ago, especially the size of the high school's bigger. Technology is really the biggest area, along with our CTE programs. They've done a pretty good job of staying within their budget. But all in all, what we're looking at is somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million that we think we're going to end up needing to add to that budget.
Is that why the principal just ran from me in the hallway? Because this was coming up?
Then, I don't, if we're spending on technology and stuff, it makes perfect sense to me. Here's my concern. We did a big project on Harmony Middle School where we used numbers for 10 years ago and had sticker shock, and here we are again. We got to stop using prior estimates on this stuff to where.
Yep.
And we've had that discussion as well. It just, we went for such a long period of time without building. And two, you know, not to make excuses, but Mark's team came into this project as it was already well down the road in terms of the budget and the scope, and so there have been some of those kinds of adjustments. They've done a really good job of trying to get the things that you want in this building, in the building, but we're at a place where to make it what this board's vision always was for that high school in terms of the rich academies, the technology, the creative furniture, all of those things, it's gonna take a little more. 10-year budget is not gonna make it.
And the team has done a really good job at whittling that down. When we first looked at it about 6 months ago, we were 2-3 million over when we first started looking at the FF&E budget. So we've really done a great job at looking at where can we save, what can we do less of,
What are a couple of those
through our
things?
bid process, we've been able to, you know, get things in at the best price, and that continues to kind of whittle down that overage to the point where we're just under $1 million or so.
So what are we cutting out? I mean, is there something we cut out?
No, just when we talk about what
You
type
said
of
you
furniture.
whittled some things
Well,
out.
what type of furniture and how much, you know, initially we had talked about 100% 21st century furniture. We've decided not to go
Okay.
with that,
Okay.
those types of
What are we going with
items.
that? Because that bothers me when we all look at something and we think something's happening and then it's not.
Do you want-
I haven't been
We
in the
haven't really
FF&E
cut
meetings.
anything out. Scott,
FF&E meetings for to help with the Liga High
meetings.
School.
I know when we first started looking at that, we were kind of over by a couple million, and we worked through it.
There were some numbers that, we looked at performing arts that we were able to trim down. Technology was a big one that we were able to trim down, and CTE was another area that we were able to trim down. But right now, we're looking, we're not completely in budget. But part of the problem is we won't be able to know until we make some more final orders, and that's where we're at. The last school we built was Liberty High School. So we've done some consulting with Windermere up in Orange County and looked at the list of materials that they purchased, for example, with their performing arts, and we looked at the materials that we had. Our list was larger than theirs. They actually have more student stations. So when we started looking at that, we think some of that will flush out.
Because that was the board's concern, was what have we cut out?
Yeah, I want to
They
make
wanna
sure we're
make
not
sure-
cutting too much.
Right,
I
that we're
mean,
not
my-
cutting too
my-
much.
That would be my,
We're definitely not cutting too much, but it's hard to give you an accurate
I
where we're
understand.
at right now because we're still ordering.
and I don't want to put
What do you
the,
say, as we put the bids out and as we place those orders, depending on,
have a
you know, the pricing,
2018
there's some
collaborative
savings.
area with a 1982 flower print couch.
We are
You
not
know
going to
what I'm
have that.
You know what I'm saying?
The final?
Except for in your room.
Yeah.
We'll make sure we have that for you.
What's the genesis of the FF&E budgeting process? Who starts that?
It typically starts out as a specific percentage of the overall budget, and I don't remember
I think
exactly
it was,
what that
I think
was.
historically, it was 10% of the construction budget. And so our construction budget on this project was 75 million, so that's where the 7.5 came from. But as we've learned, obviously, things are different than they were 10, 15 years ago. So that was
So-
just a flat amount at
Sure.
the initiation of this project.
Just so I understand the process then, it's really a dart thrown at a board in some regard that way. I mean, if you think about it, it's 10% of the cost, but we don't know that that's really a good number. What drives the conversation? Who drives the conversation with the FF&E budget? Is it facilities? Is it curriculum? Is it a combination? Is it our architecture firm giving input to the product? How does that?
That's really a great question, Mr. Weishire, and I wouldn't say that it's just a dart thrown in the dark, because when we were building and opening 3 and 4 schools, on a consistent basis, you had a
That
good
is a model,
tracking
right.
model for what that was going to be. But it's been 10 years since we've done that, and this school is unique and different in that the vision was very, very much a high-tech, very modern facility with lots of equipment. But the process for coming up with what are we going to buy And what's it going to look like for FF&E is driven collaboratively by the assistant superintendent for the level of the school, our purchasing folks, our technology folks, our budget folks, and our facilities folks, all at the table together, providing input for their specific areas. When it came to CTE decisions, Melanie was right at the table, having conversations with those areas. Robert and Scott and Russell have been right at the table, having conversations about what the technology should look like. So it's a collaborative decision-making process about what do we need, and of course then the principal too, as soon as the principal became a part of the team, became a part of that discussion.
So will the process end up looking very similar with Harmony Middle? And what I mean by that actually is being off mark because we picked a 10% number. If that is indeed the process that we've used up until this point, are we going to have another conversation in another few months about Harmony Middle School and the numbers not being there because when we actually start to unpack what we're going to need for that school, we didn't build the budget model correctly?
It's a little too early to tell, but I would tell you it's less likely because you don't have the same level of CTE involvement and investment as you do in the high school with 6 academy programs.
So I can respect the fact that we hadn't built a school in a long time, and this was the first one, and it was a new one, and it was an innovative one. I think the takeaway from this, though, and I know you're already a step ahead of me on this, is that everybody on the team really start to look at how are we doing this process so that as we continue with our capital program, we don't come back again
Absolutely.
on 2 schools, 3 schools, 4 schools and say, well, we kind of picked the number arbitrarily because 10% is the number, but it's not really 10%, it's 11, it's 12, it's 13, or it's 8.
I will tell you that the number for Neo City Academy already worries me. I've already asked the team, where do we think we're going to be? Because that, again, is a school with a different level of technology required. But we're also working on some good partnerships with that. For example, Dell has said that they will help us with the one-to-one technology for the kids in the beginning. The team had some great conversation that they'll talk about at the facilities workshop about furniture and potentially getting a grant or doing a pilot with some of the types of furniture that we want there. So those are partnerships we're exploring, but that is the other school on our current radar that worries me about where we're going to end up with the FF&E.
So I'll end on this to not belabor the point, and I know you already get it. FF&E is a significant capital investment.
Yes, it is.
And we can't get it wrong. And $1 million is a lot of money. $500,000 is a lot of money. We can put any number we want to that. We've got a number of capital projects going on to where we're going to have to make sure that our process is really right and tight with how we go about formulating our FF&E budgets.
Yes, sir.
Do you guys agree?
Well, I'd just add one thing to that. While we may not have built a school in 10 years, we have architects and construction managers who have built schools within 10 years. And they sit in here and do presentations with us all the time, and I know that FF&E number is on the architect slide.
That's why I asked who drives the conversation, because I want to understand where that number came from. It's a great
Absolutely.
point.
Understood.
All right, budget timeline?
Yes.
So if you want to talk through the timeline, and we've seen this before, what we did, we've highlighted in blue the board meetings for you. So we're here today, February 6th, having our first budget planning session for next school year. And then the next time we'll convene with the board will be on May 15th. We have a budget planning workshop scheduled again. After that meeting and before the following one, we will schedule individual meetings with you all to go over some of your specific priorities and questions in more detail.
And that's also when we'll have our line item proposals and things to share with you individually. And again, this is subject to change. This is based on your feedback in terms of wanting more involvement in the process. But this is kind of what we're proposing at this time.
Will we have some bargaining workshops before that, so we have some idea?
Yes.
Where we?
Yes.
Yeah, especially after the end of the legislative session. Once we have the state budget, we'll schedule executive session.
And I think I'd ask at the last board meeting, or maybe 2 meetings ago, if we can get one for a general discussion for bargaining also. I don't know if it's been set up yet or not.
We talked about it briefly. I don't believe we set up
It's not
a
scheduled.
time.
The next
We do-
workshop is our one to talk about our health trust and health insurance program.
Yep. We do need to have that bargaining, but I think that's a bargaining session. There was some question on whether we could have it here or whether we needed to have it upstairs. And I think
quiet meeting or whatever.
Yeah.
Executive session.
Executive session, yeah, that's a good thing of the word. That's what I was asking for.
Yes, okay, executive session. And actually, if we have some time, I have some thoughts that Mike can share with you tonight. Okay?
So,
Deborah, just, I don't know how, because I haven't been in one yet, how we post executive sessions, but when we post it, it should just say executive session regarding collective bargaining. Don't list any topics or anything.
Correct, that's what we do.
Talk about anything at that point regarding collective.
I got one question. On that schedule, do we really think the legislative session will end on time? We won't do a special session?
As of right now, yes.
Good, it's an election year, they're all trying.
It remains to be seen whether it's good.
Yes.
No, I'm not judging it. I'm just asking about timing.
so I just want to say thank you, first of all, for being intentional about building in the process that the board had requested, and we know we didn't get to work through. And then I also want to ask a question as far as expectations. Sometimes we'll look at some of these things, and today's a good example, although there's been discussion. A lot of times the board will come with the intent of listening and hearing the presentation from the superintendent staff. As you've outlined this this timeline, what are your expectations between tonight and May 15th budget planning with the board workshop? And how do you want communication from the board and board members about thoughts, concerns, input, strategies, and all that aligning the budget? How do you want that to look?
I would suggest individual conversations with me, with Sarah, with Jose, unless you think it's something that we want to bring back to the collective board. And we do still have 20 minutes this afternoon if there's additional discussion you want to have today, depending on the board chair's pleasure.
And then is the intent that when we come together on the 15th, is that planned to be all presentation, or is that planned to be discussion amongst the board with one another to see? So Clarence may talk to you about something, but I'll never know he talked to you about it until we sit at this table. So will we come to that meeting with the idea that individual opportunities for discussion and input is now shared amongst the governing body? Is that the intent for that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So as we have that meeting and we wrap that up, there'll still be plenty of opportunity for you to work with your staff on any feedback from the board at that time and
Yes.
adjust, readjust, or add in whatever the thoughts or concerns
Yes,
were.
and certainly though, board, I would love to have feedback from any of you, either today or individually, about the proposals that we provided for you today.
And I'll just end then with this, if I will, Chairman. You guys know this about me. I'm a processor, so I don't normally speak just to speak. I'm listening a lot and trying to formulate my opinions. And the same thing is true with a process like this. I want to take what's been shared and I genuinely want to digest it and really give good consideration to how I feel about some of the things. On the spot, sometimes I might have a quick feedback point, but I try to take the whole in. And so my point is, you know, in a first presentation like tonight, to have robust conversation about the intimate details, it's not my typical processing style. Doesn't mean I can or I won't do it, but I want you to understand too, each one of us respond and process differently to things. So sometimes we're not prepared tonight, but in a couple of weeks we might go, you know, I've really been thinking about what we talked about on X, Y, or Z.
Anything else, Board?
Yeah, just,
Oh, sorry. Oh, you almost got gaveled.
Wait, there's more.
just so you know, since you have it in your hands, the last couple pages of your handout include some grants information that Leslie provided. So
Yeah, we have 3 handouts, so.
just want to let you know that you have this here in that packet. Starting on page 6.
Is this on the board agenda?
That is.
And also, I went ahead and gave you a copy of your PowerPoint that is in your board agenda for our quarterly finance update. Okay?
Sorry. When we're done here, are we done until our board meeting?
4 o'clock.
For facilities workshop.
Okay, that's why I was like, why do we have this big time gap? And then Ricky had pointed out earlier, when we were looking at the 5-year capital outlay and the reduction on the quarter-cent and half-cent sales tax as well. I don't have a strong opinion yet on that, but I assume when you go back to BAB, that's going to be part of that overall conversation, impact fees, sales tax revenue, and making sure that they're really taking a good look at that. I have to imagine that some of those projections that they put in is tied to their impact fee thought as well, because the $60,000 cash throw-off every
They were
time
actually
you build a
thinking to
house.
do the same exact projection for impact fees and sales tax. I will tell you what we do when the revenue estimating conference results come out. We'll update this according to what the state comes out with for Osceola County regardless,
Okay.
unless we think it's way off.
That'll be important to his point, is that, if we are too conservative with our numbers, it will impede our ability to make the decisions we need to make about doing the things we need to get done in the district from a capital standpoint.
All right, we'll be back at 4 o'clock.
Tim.